Hello, everyone, and welcome to Collapse Club. How are we to live in the time of collapse? I'm David Baum in Seattle. With me today is Melissa Allison. Hello, Melissa. Where are you and how are things there?
Oh, I'm in Hawaii and things are warmer than they are in most of the rest of the Northern Hemisphere.
Cool. We're here to talk about courage today. When you became collapse aware, you utterly changed your life. You gave up who you were and your job and where you lived and your marriage, and you set out to create a new person. That strikes me as a very courageous act. Could you talk about the courage it took to do that?
Yes. When I think about the initial steps I took in that direction, I think terror. It was terrifying. And I suppose that means it did take courage. I felt like I was just following my heart and strongly, not in some frivolous sense, but literally looking inside myself and saying, what do I want? Okay, that's the next step. Okay, here's the next step. And I just followed one step after the other, despite a lot of noise in my head saying, what the hell are you doing?
Mhm. In your introduction that you sent to me, you said you didn't feel like you had courage until you learned how to be vulnerable. I don't quite understand that, honestly. What's the relationship between courage and vulnerability?
The courage that I had before I realized that vulnerability was important to it for me was bluster and armor. So one way I thought of it was that to get out of bed in the morning was such a terrifying and courageous act for me for many years that everything else was gravy. And so I would go out there and do jobs that were actually quite tenacious and took a lot of courage, but that they weren't taking my courage. And I never thought I was a fearful person. And then in my 30s, at some point, I realized that I was actually driven by fear and that I had a lot of bluster and armor that looked like no fear, that looked like courage, and that I needed to take that off and become vulnerable. And sort of the rest of my path since then has been increasing layers of vulnerability and therefore strength and courage.
You mentioned fear. Uh, the reason this topic intersects with collapse is that the prospect of collapse of civilization and the ecological Earth system is accompanied by a tremendous amount of fear. People are fearful, are scared, terrorized. Uh, is courage the absence of fear?
No, I don't think so. In my opinion, in my experience, fear, to be alive is to sometimes have fear, and then courage is one way to handle that fear.
And what is it to handle it courageously? What's the distinguishing feature of a courageous method?
Yeah, I think there's I think there's a couple ways to look at it. I think that in a very in my opinion, in a very facile sense, people who bluster and bully and have a lot of armor on themselves can look courageous. I've come to think that that's actually the opposite of courage, that real courage is to look inside of ourselves and see what's going on, and therefore why we're creating the chaos individually and collectively that we see out in the world.
To look at ourselves and understand the chaos we're creating. What do you have to do that?
Well, it's a path, it's a practice. Like they say in Buddhism, in my experience, you start with the first scary thing that's in front of you. I did. And you feel the sensations that fear is creating in your body, instead of running from them, arguing with them, all the other things you might do, getting mad at external people who are creating them for you, who you think are creating them for you. You just face the sensations inside yourself until until that fear is diminished and gone, and then you do it with the next thing, and on and on. And I feel for myself that that's my practice that's helping me accept a lot of things that are happening out in the world, including collapse.
I hear you. It's a matter of acceptance, of being willing to stay with the fear. I think Joanna Macy has a nostrum of that kind. You stay with the, or Pema Chodron, staying with the fear, staying with the discomfort, staying with the pain, and accepting that it really is part of your experience. It's part of yourself. Is that courageous?
That's exactly, I believe that is the definition of courage.
So let's talk big time. If we are really looking at collapse of civilization and Earth systems, how are we supposed to accept that that is part of us?
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting, because I'm seeing your question as in two parts: accepting in general, accepting this thing, and the idea that what's on the outside is a reflection of what's on the inside. My feeling from watching what happens in my own life when I sit with the fear and pain, and then it passes, and I have ease again and joy, and until the next thing comes along, that, because it's always changing. My experience of doing that is that the more I do that, the more my external life changes. And it's not that the whole globe changes because of what's happening inside of me, but I do think if that everyone did that collectively, our behavior would change in such a way that we wouldn't have such a terrifying external reality, meaning the one that we've created.
So you think, it sounds like you're saying that people's fear and rejection of reality, basically, it causes the chaos that afflicts the world.
That's what I believe. I believe it causes chaos inside of us, and then we act in ways that make the chaos visible externally. For example, I am addicted to sugar, and when I'm not dealing with my fear and my pain, I will eat a lot of sugar, and that could lead to some real health consequences. And even just in that day, it leads to emotional, like what sugar does to my emotions, consequences. If all of us are doing that in whatever way we self-soothe, it's not going to be pretty, and it's not pretty.
And nowadays, the world as a whole is addicted to fossil fuels and the ease and power that they bring, regardless of the consequences in the long term.
We're addicted to many things, including that, yes.
I'd like to welcome Wendy and Kat, who've joined us on the live stream, and a few other people too. Thank you so much for dropping by, folks. Really appreciate your attention. Thanks. I myself am facing questions of courage. I have some addictions. I'm addicted, for example, to nicotine gum, which at this stage of life is a dangerous habit to have: blood pressure, stroke, et cetera, et cetera. The courage to let go of the things we rely on to ease the pain, to soothe our discomfort, the courage to let go seems like a really challenging strength to muster.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when I try to white knuckle it, when I try to say, I'm not going to eat sugar today, and create rules around it, saying, this is the behavior that I want from myself, then it's always in my mind. It's kind of nagging at me. Well, when are you going to eat the sugar? Are you sure you're not going to eat it? Like, my ego gets kind of nutty and chattery. But if I instead say, today I'm going to be with my emotions, and whatever comes up, whatever sensations arise in my body, then when the emotion comes up that would lead me to sugar, and I just feel it instead, that's more soothing than the sugar is. And I end up not eating sugar as a byproduct.
Seriously, you actually have that successful relationship with the feeling that makes you want to go to your addiction?
It's the only way I am able to not eat a ton of sugar.
Describe that a little more, please.
It's on the days when I'm able to be fully present to myself, including any difficult sensations that come up, which takes courage. I don't eat sugar. And on the days when I abandon myself, I eat sugar. It's a substitute for loving myself or taking care of myself.
Well, I find that absolutely fascinating. You're describing the territory on the other side of victory. That's how it shows itself to me. What's it like?
Well, I don't succeed every day, but on the days that I do, it feels very healthy and loving. It feels loving. It feels like life and love instead of, fear and capitulation and struggle. It doesn't feel like struggle. It doesn't feel like I'm fighting myself and my emotions and the sugar. It feels like I'm in harmony with myself. And that's like when you're saying on the other side of it, yeah, I could get like a lot of braggadocio with myself, like, oh, you did really well today, but actually that's not going to make me do well tomorrow. What's going to make me do well tomorrow is remembering to stick with it when it's hard. And that's just hard. It's just hard to stay with difficult emotions when they come up.
It's just hard. So there is a part of this process that is just hard. And it sounds like one of the things about being courageous is being willing to simply do the hard part.
I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I've gone through various stages of trying to eliminate the triggers. I'm a former journalist and I don't read the news. I let other people tell me what's happening. And I don't go on Twitter very much. But when I do, I fall in completely. Things go terribly wrong. And so it takes a lot of, and then sometimes, despite having removed a lot of the triggers, they'll come into my inbox or they'll arrive in my friends' circles or some other place that I'm not expecting them. And I have to, and that's hard. I have to say, oh, here it is, this thing I've been avoiding. Am I going to avoid it by eating sugar or having some argument with myself or getting mad at this person who brought it? Which, yes, I do. Or am I going to look at what it's creating for me inside my body and take care of myself like a parent would a baby, or a child having a difficult emotion? And that part goes a lot better when I do it that way. That's the courage, I think.
It seems like it's a possibility that in order to behave well toward oneself, one needs to become in touch with something larger than oneself. For example, the 12-step programs talk about one's higher power, giving up one's will. We talk about ego death or letting go of the ego. Do you think that part of the process of taking courageous action is to get in touch with something bigger that can strengthen or substitute for the individual self?
I do. I tend to see it from a Buddhist perspective. So I don't reach for God as much as I reach for God inside of me. And the ego death thing that you mentioned, I don't like to see myself as my ego, which I think of as the chattering voices in my head. You should this, you should that. Here are the rules. Here's how things need to be for you to be safe. I don't think that's my friend, and I don't think it's me. I think I am my spirit, my essence, something else that I feel is connected to everything and may have a godlike entity out there. I don't really worry about that. I just try to be in touch with my higher self, because I know when I have courage and the ability to deal with the sensations that flow through my body.
And was that person there all the time?
I think that person was there all the time and is probably the reason I'm alive, but I wasn't aware of her until my 30s. I wasn't consciously aware of her.
What blocked you from being aware?
And that's a good question. I'm going to say in retrospect, I was seduced by the voices, the ego voice and voices. I think the ego talks to itself in my head too. I have all kinds of thoughts about schizophrenia actually, but anyway, yeah, the voice or voices, the you should, the parental scolding in my head. I think I thought that was me. I brainwashed myself, or I just grew up believing and probably having modeled for me that was me.
Well, this goes back to the question of the authentic self. And the way I've always thought about your story, giving up your job and your house and your marriage and the place you were, and setting out to find a new place to live and new people to be with, and a new person to be. I've always thought of that as really seeking an authentic self. And I'm starting to think that that really is a challenge that individuals face across the world, and indeed humanity as a whole is really looking for what it means to be authentically human within the world system.
Yeah, I think that's true. I feel like, given your earlier question, I feel like our authentic selves are always here and we're just not always in touch with them. And it takes moment to moment awareness of that authentic self in order to live lives that are meaningful and not harmful.
Well, we are sure covering a lot of ground.
You have a way of doing this in your interviews. I really love it.
Well, let's talk about uncharted territory. One of the things about seeking one's authentic self, giving up the role that we've been playing in society, is that we face uncertainty. We don't know who we're going to end up being. We don't know where we're going to be, what to do, who ultimately we ourselves will end up being. That can be tremendously exciting, or it can be the root of all fear. I mean, the loss of the self is the thing I think we fear most of all. So when we're looking at uncharted territory, what attitude should we adopt?
There's so much in what you said. I want to talk a little bit about just what that brought up for me. I don't have as much, habitually, my ego does not have as much fear about the future and what's coming as it does about what happened in the past. So I struggle, a lot of the sensations that habitually come up for me are around guilt. Did this person do this because of me? Did I hurt this person? Is this, like, I have a lot of like backward misery and I don't have a lot of forward misery. So that's just a nice habit of my brain. When it comes to collapse, I'm able to think about it without it triggering all this old habitual stuff. I think that the only way to deal with either of those situations, the looking backward or the miserable looking backward or the miserable looking forward, is to just be right here, right in this moment with our breath. It's really, I think, and I know this is a new age way of saying this, but I think that it's also true in my experience that this moment is all that is. If I'm thinking about the future, I'm thinking in this moment, the only thing that is, about what I think might happen in the future. And I can't really know, and there's no point to it. And that's why I think it creates so much misery. So all I can do is take care of this moment and what I can feel right now. And that's where joy is. And I think that's the only place where life is.
I agree. Interestingly, my angst is about the future, not what's going to happen. I don't think it matters what happens, frankly, but I think what matters is how people experience it. I take as a matter of faith that everyone is destined for joy and glory and completeness and the utter fulfillment of everything that they desire to be, not in a selfish way, but in a beneficial way, that we will all be joined together in joy. I take that as a matter of faith, as an axiom. However, you look at the various scenarios which present themselves to the sort of normal temporal world sensation apparatus, it's awful, it's terrible. And what I am trying to do is to understand what is the route between here and the ultimate salvation of all humanity. I know that's what's going to happen, but I cannot see how. And learning to be courageous in sitting with that, as you say, in the here and now, and realizing it's not up to me, and it probably is beyond my vision, that it takes a toll, and learning to deal with the toll it takes, that takes courage. And that's why I seek courage.
Yes, that resonates for me so much. That's very much my experience of it too. The seeing what's happening, I struggle to accept what's happening right now when we're not even in the worst throes of collapse. And then I'm like, I don't see the path either. I can't see a big enough picture to get us there. The only thing I can do that gives me a little hope and maybe some insight is know that when I'm in chaos, like the chaos I see outside, when I'm in division inside myself, divisive within myself, the way that I get back to peace is possible for me, and therefore it must be possible for all humans.
Mm. Well, that's a very generous and helpful way to think about it. I guess that is the offering of Buddhism and many other teachings, that each person really can find peace right now just by breathing, basically. I worry about people who don't have enough to eat, though, who are threatened by drought and locusts and marauding armies and all of the terrible threats that we learn about that people are faced with. I worry for their suffering, and what good does my courage do them? Shouldn't I be out there, hauling water or bearing arms against evil? It's like, what is a person to do in these terrible times?
Yeah, that resonates for me too. I've struggled a lot with that. And I think that each of us is responsible for our own peace, for our own peace of mind, for our own presence, for our own joy. And I think that the people who are suffering are not the ones who are divided in their minds. They might be suffering a great deal, but I don't know. I don't believe that they are the ones not accepting reality. I believe it's other people. And I've fought those other people in my head and in various external ways for a lot of my life. That's where a lot of my struggle is. Often well-intended people are the ones that I want to control and fight and not accept. And I think again, it's back to if I carry the water because in my heart, that's what I want to do, and not because I believe I have to save the world, which I can't do. I can't carry water for every single person. I can't make sure that every girl in India is not sold into marriage because she's from a poor family. I cannot make sure that factory farmed animals do not continue to be factory farmed. Like, I can't do all of it. I will literally drive myself crazy and be useless to anyone who comes in touch with me. So what's the opposite of that? To be at peace with what is, and to do what I have a passion and energy for, and know more, and to not deplete myself. And if we each did that, possibly we could make change. I think lately I've been thinking of Vicki Robbins' book, Your Money or Your Life. So a lot of people struggle around money, and a lot of people make enough money that they could be financially independent and give the finger to the system if they wanted to, and they don't. We go looking for luxuries. We spend our money in ways that keeps us beholden to the system. But what if we all, who did make enough money to after, not when we're 65, but sooner, to give the finger to the system. And a lot of people are actually quitting their jobs right now because of what's happening out in the world. What if that happened on an even grander scale? The system would break because of us. We individually can make a huge difference just by the choices we make for personal freedom in our own lives.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, I think we have actually reached something. It's another question, but it's a question that deserves further investigation. And that is the question of, how does individual peace, strength, and courage affect the global situation and the fate of all humanity and the suffering of all humanity? What is it about our own practice that is beneficial to all the world? And to me, that's a question that I think we should go into again at another time.
Yeah, I think it's a great question.
Melissa, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
I always love talking to you. Thank you for inviting me and having this amazing subject and list of questions.
And thank you to everyone who visited us on the live stream and everyone who has watched this video in recording. We really appreciate your being here. Until we meet again, farewell.